All right, welcome everybody to book discussion part 2 of Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American City. Alvin here with Kheprw Institute. Good to see everybody. And I think we just kick it off with intros. And so I will go ahead and pass it over to Jeb.
Hello,
Oh,
everybody.
and sorry, the intros, we'll do the number, how you're doing 1 to 10. Color, if today were a color, what color would it be? And does anyone have a check-in question they want to add in?
Okay, I have a check-in question, so I'll take that on.
Great.
So my name's Jeb Reese. I work in Indiana. I manage the land bank there, and also do affordable housing development and other things when necessary. I'm excited to be here today. I'm an urban planner, so I'm a big fan of Jane Jacobs' book. Today, I'm feeling a 9.5, almost a perfect day. And today, I think my color is yellow. So check-in question is something you like to do in Indianapolis on a nice day. And for me, it would be just walking around my neighborhood and looking at people's houses and talking about houses because it's a part of who I am, I guess. So I will go ahead and kick it off to Dawn.
Yeah, color is always an 8. And no, sorry, number. Color is burgundy. I'm thinking of a glass of red wine, but it's too cold to sit outside with it. Things I like to do when it's nice weather is definitely sit out on Rick's boatyard. It kind of gives me the vibe of the city I come from, the ocean. Well, there's no ocean, but the body of water and just the waterfront experience, which I really miss when I'm not at home. So definitely Rick's boatyard. And I'll pass it on to Alvin.
Okay, did you pass it to me, Don?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm feeling like an 8 color electric yellow. And what I like to do on a nice day is go to the 100 Acres Park and do like a couple loops around the trail. Ever since they like reopened like the whole loop, it's really nice. I enjoy it. And I will pass it to Miss Pambana.
Sunlight, white, 8. And one of the things that I like to do is from time to time go down to the canal right between St. Clair and Michigan, and then just kind of walk around and look at what different people are doing and sit down there. And let me see, I will pass it to Claudia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia. I also go by Claude. I'm feeling a 7.5 today. And for color, I'm kind of feeling like plaid. There's this little Chihuahua man is walking that's wearing a plaid coat, and that's very cute. So I know that's not a color, but it's a combo of colors. And feel like I'm missing something. Oh, what do I like to do on a nice day like this? I like to roller skate outside or take my dog on a run, meaning I bike and he runs because I can't keep up with him. So that's what I like to do on this weather.
Okay, we'll pass it over to Jeanette.
I get my mute off. Jeanette Smith. I'm about a 7, I think, right now. Nice spring green. And something I like to do when the weather's nice outside is go out and help Habitat build homes for people that need affordable homes.
Nice. Jeanette, how long have you been building with Habitat?
It depends on how you count it. I've been a Tiger since 2019, but I've built homes off and on for them since the late 80s. Not all in Indianapolis. Okay, did we get Dawn? That's the
Yeah.
only one that okay, that I may be the last one.
Yep. So we can go ahead and start chatting about the book. So if you've read The Death and Life of Great American Cities, or just know about it, or have had conversations with other people about it, feel free to jump in whenever. But first, I just wanted to kind of like gauge everybody's reactions to maybe some of these things that Jane Jacobs has talked about, or some of these things that she discusses in the book. The book is very opinionated, so it could definitely be encourage some strong feelings and reactions. So we can start off by talking about that. But first, TJ and Terry Jett joined, so we can get introductions from them really quick.
Yeah. And our check-in questions today are how you're feeling 1 to 10. If today were a color, what color would it be? And your favorite thing to do around Indianapolis when the weather's really nice. And I will pass it to my good friend, Dr. Terry Jett, who is also going to help us be a co-facilitator tonight on the book.
Okay, well, I'm a number 7.5, and my color is black. And my favorite thing to do, good weather. Oh, so many things, but I live near Eagle Creek Park, so I like going to Eagle Creek Park and walking around there. Has everyone gone, or should I pass it to TJ?
TJ's up.
Okay.
I can go. Sorry for being late. I'm kind of picking up my son at the same time. My number, right? I'm doing pretty good, maybe 7 or 8. And I love when the weather's nice. I love to be outside and just discovering new places, going for hikes or visiting parks. And the last one was color. Is that right? I can't remember. I think just like purple or pink, the color. I love all the redbud trees that are blooming right now, and just all the color they're bringing.
Thanks, TJ. Glad you could join us. And then last but not least, we have Imhotep here.
Hey guys, color teal, numbers 8.5. And what's the check-in question?
When the weather's nice, what's the thing you like to do around Indianapolis?
I really like to sit on the front porch like 5 a.m. and talk to the birds. We have a really great conversation with each other, and then after that, you got to engage with humans. So that's what I like the most. Pass it back to you.
And we also had Amani who just joined too.
All I heard is that we have to engage with humans, and I can't agree with that more. Even though I always feel I don't always get around.
Awesome, Amani, good to see you. So today the check-in color number, and what's a thing you like to do around Indianapolis when it's really nice out?
Oh, when it's really nice out? Well, when it's really nice out, we haven't gotten to this point yet, but okay, so my number is probably like 7.9, and my color is blue, like deep royal blue, like this color kind of like cobalt. Cobalt? I don't know. And what I really love to do when it's not super hot, but it's like kind of nice, kind of like temperate, a little bit warmer than this. I love outdoor music. I love music in general, anything that's music involved. But yeah, if it's like outdoors plus music, oh my gosh, that's better. That
Well, I think I will go ahead and take the opportunity to pass it to Dr. Terry Jett. You all heard from us last time, Jeb and I, so we're going to pass it to her to kick us off. Any thoughts or questions you want to start the discussion with?
Okay, sure. Well, I was excited to hear that you're discussing Jane Jacobs' book, Death and Life of Great American Cities. And I had to do a little bit of a search because this was a book that I used in graduate school. And I actually found my book. And not only did I find it, I found like my index card notes that I actually have. So I'm showing proof that I actually really went through this text. And what I would like to kind of kick us off with is I remember that I was really intrigued by the solutions that she offers for the revitalization of cities. And she talks about a lot of things in the text that we should be doing. And you can actually, when you think about our, Indianapolis city, especially sort of the urban areas, she talks about what really would be a successful design that benefits a majority of people across various economic status, which is really what she was focusing on. But also, we can say across race, gender, different types of families, and different economic opportunities. And so one thing that she points out is the way that we, terms that we use for different types of development. And let me get the term that I was really struck by. Let's see, let me get my cards out. Oh, she talks about central business districts in the context of downtowns, and how really, if you're going to develop an area like that in order to benefit a large majority of the community, that you should make sure that different types of businesses can actually function, not just, these big corporations, that there has to be opportunities for small businesses to also be successful. And that you have to think about things in terms of the level of a civic engagement that happens within those areas. And also you have to think about the primary use of downtowns and neighborhoods. And so I'd like us to really kind of think about our downtown in particular, because kind of the heart of the city is like what's happening in the downtown, and then how that reverberates across the various communities. Indianapolis is kind of unusual, especially with regard to Unigov. So we can also talk about that and how that has really affected the development of the city proper, central district, in relationship to these townships. And I actually see a lot of money that should be more focused on the central area being funneled out into the townships. And I'm someone that lives in a township, not in the central district. So I'd like to kind of kick off our conversation about, what we see in comparison, like how we are living in comparison to what Jane Jacobs suggests should be happening. So who would like to start with that?
Well, something that just in regards to downtown, I had a conversation with this. I was going to work one day and wound up in this long conversation with this guy who worked at a city planning office downtown, like a private firm. And he was talking to me about all of the plans that they have for downtown now, like reworking how the city council is moving, and how they're trying to redevelop new buildings for like more housing. And like I think that they said that the city market was slated to become something else. The prosecutor, like a lot of those buildings down there are just like not going to be there in 10, 15 years. They're going to be totally work. And so we're talking about the housing, not only what downtown is going to look like industry-wise, because with the civic, with a lot of the civic centered processes that are moving to the south side. I don't know where it's the quote unquote, what are they calling it? The justice center or something. I forget. What is they're calling that new building? Where they're gonna have all the courts and
Oh,
stuff
that's
that
already, yeah, that's on the south side. Yeah, kind of southeast. The Justice
but
Center.
The CJC, Criminal Justice Center.
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Is that still considered central, or is that? I guess that is central, still technically.
Yeah.
But it's just was before. But just thinking about what businesses are going to be looked at, you come in now that they're tearing the mall down and all of these larger, all these places that harbor larger, like maybe not corporations, but like chains and stuff like that. And just, I feel like, I just want to say, I feel like, or I know that we are in flux as a downtown. And it'll be really interesting to see how things are moving, because I, as a person that doesn't always engage with like the Indian Business Journal and stuff like that, when we were talking, I was like, oh, all of this is news to me. I didn't know that we were like, I knew that the CJC was coming, but yeah, I'm interested to see, but I'm also maybe not that optimistic, because I feel like there wasn't a huge, I just feel like the way that it sounded from him that they were going about it was like, the people in an office talking about this is what we're going to do, and not so much focusing on this is what the community wants, this is what people are looking for, that kind of thing. Because what I see downtown is a lot of some old buildings that we kind of held on to, but in comparison to the places like, Louisville and just other big cities, like of course Chicago, the way that we hold on to old infrastructure just is bad. And I think that when we rebuild, another thing that we were talking about were those kind of like Lego apartment buildings down there, and how they're built with this by the people that fund them. They're built with this idea of we're going to build them as cheap as we can, and as soon as we get our money, we'll tear them down, sell place, and turn it into something else. And so that longevity isn't really, it's just not the same as when you go to a place, I don't know, like thinking when in Chicago, where like these beautiful old stone buildings that have been around for a long time and maintained. And when I look around to me, I don't, at least in the downtown area or the central area, that's not something I see a lot of. So I do think that there's a lack of thought to sustainably like keep building and have that legacy. But yeah, that's just my little comment. Okay, I'm done talking.
Yeah, what you're pointing out is something that Jane Jacobs says, and I'll just point out a couple of things because it's what you're saying is speaking to her text. And she says that without a strong and inclusive central heart, a city tends to become a collection of interests isolated from one another. And so I think that that's one aspect that we're witnessing. And she says that there needs to be two necessary conditions. There needs to be a mixture of primary diversity and sufficient concentration of dwellings. And she always says that the dwellings must be mixed use dwellings in order for a community to thrive. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about, like who's making decisions, is people are operating in isolation, and there's not a cohesion to the development that's happening. That's kind of what you're speaking to.
Yeah, and also something else we talked about, and I know that Alvin and some other folks, we talked about this, just like the last, you said mixed use dwellings. Like I feel like either downtown is focused on like high end, very single, like for young professionals, high end, on the more expensive side, apartments that aren't really meant for families. So that means, you know, once young, I mean, people, yes, when people are in jobs and they like their places and stay, but that kind of changes the tone of what the community feels like, and how long people stay there. Like I've lived in buildings that are more, it's like family friendly, and people have been there for 30 plus years, and in buildings where, you know, I just don't see that's what they're focusing on right now. And so like missing that those split levels, those kind of smaller places that still give a sense of community, but still welcome people from a range of incomes, I think is also something that we are lacking, especially considering that the central area used to be so full of those dwellings. So yeah.
Yeah, and speaking about diversity, I do have a question for Dr. Jett and then the rest of the group too. In particular, since it was written, so it's written in like 60s or so, and now like, I don't know, 47, 60 years later, it's the economy has changed a lot. So the American economy has turned more toward financialization, as well as real estate is used primarily as like a financial asset or largely as a financial asset and an investment vehicle. Whereas maybe you might say in the 60s, it was not as much of that. It was for the use, the value of it being used for commercial and residential and industrial. So I would ask, how do you think some of Jane Jacobs' thinking and philosophy about creating diversity? What are the challenges and or opportunities that shift has created?
Well, I would say the challenges, especially in terms of the real estate arena, are similar to a lot of different other arenas, in that we have this growth of multinational corporations that have no commitment to any particular community because they're operating on a global scale. And so it doesn't matter where they're based. It doesn't mean that, like just say the Simons, you know, like their headquarters in certain locations, but they don't necessarily have an allegiance to that community. They can pick up and go anywhere. And their main goal is profit. And I know this because my brother works for Hines Development Corporation, which is in Houston, Texas. That's a large venture capitalist corporation, and they have, and the owner actually is based in London, England. And they have, but their headquarters is in Houston, and they have they invest in large, like skyscraper type of buildings all over the country. And so they're just looking for that investment. They're not looking at the larger picture of how that affects the rest of the community, like the housing, what else is going on. They're just looking to buy or develop these locations and get as much out of that building as they can. You know, law firms or whatever else is going to move into those buildings. And so many cities are competing, especially, you know, large cities are competing for jobs per se, and not even, you know, great jobs. And so they're basically selling our souls, for these, they're making it easy to invest in the cities, with all sorts of subsidies and tax breaks, for these, for these types of development. And the general public is not participating as much as it should be, in how these decisions are made. We're not going to, the public hearings, in the way that we should. We're just not paying as close attention, to what is happening, unless it's happening right in our neighborhood. And we really need to be looking at larger scales, being in a large city. So, yeah, things are different.
Dr. Jett, I really appreciated you talking about that, because I feel like one thing that's very notable about the change from when Jane Jacobs was writing to now is very much how like the funding in cities has now become a lot less like through federal taxes and through state distribution, and very much motivated by municipalities trying to market to corporations and to people with wealth. And I also feel like Jane Jacobs, I didn't gather from this text, and this is the only thing I've read by Jane Jacobs, and I've been told I should read other things by her that happened later, but it doesn't really seem to recognize what means and the return of white wealth back into cities, and the change in tides of the preferences and whims of people with economic privilege and power. So like that's not really to say like, white yuppies like me with privilege and power are morally wrong for wanting to enjoy a city and the amenities of density and things, but it is like a huge question of displacement and how these municipalities acting like private businesses start to try to market themselves as like a corporation almost to appeal to wealth to come back into cities. So that's something that I feel like is notable about Jane Jacobs' writing versus now.
I'll say that, she talks a lot about community and, I guess I would say maybe back in that time and even in downtown areas, there was more of this where you could be a local entrepreneur or business and maybe have a presence downtown. But I think that as it's grown and evolved, it has centered around. I don't think that, when there's planning going on as relates to downtown, that there's any real thought about its connection to neighborhood and community, but that it's more about, like, how can we attract wealth and dollars and people from other places to our cities, what is it that they can visit? What can they spend money on? What do we need to put downtown so that, I think it's viewed as the key aspect or the most important aspect of the economy, and not necessarily linked to community and the rest of Indianapolis or the metro area, and how the two can complement or work together. And then also how can it support community? Because, like whenever I hear about Indianapolis, and I'm sure there's some, communities down there, you don't ever really hear much about that in terms of neighborhoods or communities. Neighborhoods and communities are everywhere around downtown, but not in downtown. Although there is, I know, like this one, I think it's entity that kind of advocates for the businesses in downtown and that kind of stuff. But when she talks about community, I don't think that that's a principle that's really something that is looked at and thought in most cities now anymore, and definitely not here. That it's more about like, how can we attract more dollars in terms of income, sales, and businesses, and then use that for our tax purposes or whatever, and that kind of thing. That's what I think.
Awesome. I think Dawn, you had something to say. Go for it.
Yeah, you know me, I always bring the outside world in. So just going back to the CBD, you know, just from my experience and watching major cities hold onto CBDs. And then, so if you look at Cape Town, where I'm from, we held onto our CBDs. So we did not allow housing in the CBD. It was strictly for business. And then if you look at a city like Johannesburg, that allowed housing in the CBD. So it was no longer just strictly a business district. It was now a community, like you say. There's living, there's playing, there's working. And I think what the two cities really learned is that Cape Town, which is the city that said we will only be a CBD and we will not allow any residents. If you are staying there, it's because you're in a hotel or something like that. It's not because you have an apartment there. City is one of the 7 wonders in the world. It attracts a lot of tourists, attracts a lot of investment, whereas Johannesburg, that allowed downtown living, saw a lot of these businesses move out of the city and then establish elsewhere. So really trying to figure out the difference in terms of, so my major is policy. And really, are you trying to really build a community, or are you trying to build economic infrastructure? And so the two cities, if you look at them and compare, is very real in terms of what she writes and how we even come about making these policies and decisions about how we allow certain things to happen in the city. So everybody in Cape Town will live outside of the city. Everybody travels into the city to go work. During the night, the city is shut down. Everybody goes home and nightlife starts. So there's a second economy that almost takes over after everybody. So people go from their offices to bars and restaurants, then call it the sundowners. And a whole new, like I say, economy takes over. So the same place that was a office today is a bar tonight. And so economically, keeping living out of the city works very well for that city. In Johannesburg, it did not work out so well. Most of the bigger companies are there. They were looking at, because it's the most populous city, it's 80% of the nation is there. It's like a New York. And they thought if they could have their staff and people live closer, that would be a sell, but it wasn't. So all of those businesses moved out of the city. You now have these skyscrapers that is sitting there with vacancies, and people just taking them over. They use for drugs and whatever. So if you want to ever see a 30-story building that's gone to the pots, you have to see that. And so I think from, just thinking in a bit broader scope, that sometimes, like you said earlier, I think the doctor said, a good mix, a good diversity, but really keeping that balance so that's healthy for the city.
I haven't been to South Africa in a long time, but I remember thinking Cape Town was kind of like San Francisco because of
Yeah.
the restaurants.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just beautiful, but yeah, it's different than Johannesburg. And I can see how that sort of development process would happen, but Cape Town's got that, it's got that beautiful waterfront area. And so that lends a different kind of feeling to it also. But yes, you made me want to go back to Cape Town. Just talking about it, I was like, oh yes, I remember. She uses some interesting terms. And if we can get past it, we can still think about what she's saying. Like I'm thinking about this notion of slumming and unslumming. And maybe we would align, I don't know, a term like ghetto. I'm not really sure, how we would have suggested, but this is what she says. I'm going to just quote something that she said about that, about how you transform more, I guess I would say, economically sort of deprived areas. And that really means underdeveloped and undeveloped, and just not given the resources that it should be. And she says, our present urban renewal laws are an attempt to break this particular linkage in the vicious cycles by forthrightly wiping away slums and their populations and replacing them with projects intended to produce higher tax yields or to lure back easier populations with less expensive public requirements. So that's kind of speaking to what I think Claudia was mentioning. The method fails. At best, it merely shifts slums from here to there, adding its own tincture of extra hardship and disruption. At worst, it destroys neighborhoods where constructive and improving communities exist and where the situation calls for encouragement rather than destruction. Conventional planning approaches to slums and slum dwellers are thoroughly paternalistic. To overcome slums, we must regard slum dwellers as people capable of understanding and acting upon their own self-interest, which they certainly are. The key link in a perpetual slum is that too many people move out of it too fast, and in the meantime, dream of getting out. And so it's kind of an interesting perspective that she's applying, which we certainly do see in a number of neighborhoods today. People kind of being forced out, and not being brought into the investment of the community and seen as more of a burden collectively than from an asset, seen from a deficit position rather than an asset position, and being more included in the redevelopment of those neighborhoods. So we see that in quite a few spaces, quite a few places. And another thing that feeds into, which I like to hear everybody's perspective on, is transportation. And we've got a lot of that happening right now with these different lines and the way that they're, where they're going and who they're serving and how they're cutting through certain communities, who's actually using the lines and what's the bigger picture for them, red, purple, blue, whatever they are.
Yeah, Dr. Jed, I think you left up a really striking point for me about the book, was just the emphasis on the relationships people have. That basically they were looking at when these big slum clearance projects came through and built new shiny buildings, that quality of life and health actually decreased, and people's economic, it really, it disrupted the relationships that already existed. And I think that you see it in history and in our own stories, that lower income, or folks who are faced with poverty as well as racial oppression, are forced and through to both survive and thrive, work together and cooperate and build those relationships. And not to say it's all sunshine and rainbows, because there's also unhealthy reactions to deprivation and oppression too. But that just the value that relationships and people have over just the idea of buildings and progress is, I think, just a really important thing to disrupt in the mythology of progress.
Yeah, I would want to chime in. I was really struck by, and I think it's connected to what Alvin said, the proposal that on housing affordability, that it wouldn't be based on the location, but based on the person. And so you'd leave the free market to develop places that anybody would want to live at. And that also seems to tie into some of the research that says that people that, your kids that come from a lower socioeconomic area or family, can really benefit from being in a more heterogeneous mixture, diversity of income and race and all kinds of things. And kind of a discouragement that of how long ago this was written and that nobody's taken seem to take any attempts to try any of these ideas.
I had a real life aha moment sort of along these lines recently. And I'm sure that most of us are familiar with Cabrini Green, which is a project that kind of spurred up around the same time this book was written in Chicago. But prior to Cabrini Green being Cabrini Green, it was an Italian slum called the Little Hell neighborhood. And it was, I believe, at one point, one of the most like dangerous places in the United States. It was like where Al Capone did all of his like planning and stuff. And in the middle of this neighborhood, there was a corner called like Murder Corner, where like your likelihood of being like shot at this corner was like incredibly high. So as part of slum clearance, you know, in conjuncture with the Chicago Plan Commission, all of this neighborhood was raised for the construction of the Cabrini Green public housing development. And obviously, Cabrini Green ended up failing. There are so many reasons why, and there's many reasons why people, you know, theorize why it failed. But ultimately, what ended up happening was that that community was displaced again. So now this site, you know, just off of downtown Chicago, has been, you know, the site of 2 generational displacements. And I visited Chicago recently, and I was waiting for a bus. I was sitting on a curb outside of a Crate and Barrel, and I was thinking about where I was, and I realized that I was in like the fringe of Cabrini Green and like the Little Hell neighborhood. There was like an Apple store across the street, and it really just struck me that, and I think it really relates well to the life and death of great American cities, that like, you know, this is now a place that you know, basically devoid of inhabitants. It's, you know, very low density. It's high-end retail, and it's essentially placeless. Like there's nothing that really makes this space special anymore. And that was all done on part of the city of Chicago's governmental planning systems, and also, you know, I'm sure the state of Illinois, federal government. And so I was just kind of struck about, you know, the lasting impacts that these urban renewal projects still have in cities.
Thank you for sharing that with me.
I'm curious though, because you know, in talking about this and you talking about the city coming up with it, I'm curious, and it did not, I guess, exist at the time of Jane Jacobs, but now, you know, I've been reading articles and they talk about urban designers and urban planners and ways that they can engage community through design idea. And so I'm just curious if y'all think that that is something that is going to take hold, or if that's something that people going through urban planning now are looking at and thinking more about, how can we, like when we want to how can we work with community to come up with what they really want and desire and want to see there, and then, you know, provide the funds through city and things like that to build it, versus, you know, having urban planners get together and say, oh, this is what they need and this is what we're going to build and this would be great. And then she gave some examples, like you said, where they built this complex and they had this green space or some kind of square and the people just hated it, you know, and they was like, you know, because, you know, nobody asked them what did they want or what did they need.
To that question of city planners and urban planners engaging the community more to learn more what they want. I feel like, so my work is as a civil engineer and consulting, and a lot of our work is in public right of way. So we're hired by like Department of Transit in the state to do work. And I don't know how much of the interest and engagement is very genuine in the idea of these people are assets and we want to learn what they have to say about it because we believe that they are the experts of their own experience, you know. That's something that I try to talk about with my coworkers is the engineers might have the technical knowledge and gone to school for this and that, but the people who walk that street every day are probably the experts on what it's like to live on that street and to navigate it. And it there has been a lot of increased pressure on the state to invest in public engagement and to do a lot more community input in the preliminary parts of doing development. But I'm not sure how much of that is just to protect against liability and the potential of getting sued or, you know, having a real controversy, and how much of it is genuine interest in wanting to hear solutions rather than just getting no controversy for their solution. So that's my thought.
Well, Britt Red, I don't know if you all know Britt, who is, I had to go to her LinkedIn to look up her formal title. With her, but they are principal planner for land use strategy at City of Indianapolis, and they work with the Department of Metropolitan Development. And last year, and I believe a couple of times before, they've run what's called a People's Academy for urban planning. And it's excellent because they go through like some history in terms of the development of Indianapolis and how Black communities in particular have been harmed. And then also they talk about how the public can participate in the urban planning process and kind of give interesting information about how it actually works, like what's the process of getting a license or, you know, land use or changing zoning or advocating for certain zoning to take place to create different types of mixed use in a space. You know, where do you go to, for example, say you need a street light? You know, who do you contact to have sidewalks created? And some of these things are really kind of what we might say are simple things that really go a long way in improving a neighborhood, but people don't know how to go about actually advocating for that. And so this People's Planning Academy is really excellent. And maybe it'd be great to invite Britt to come to one of the discussions to give, you know, some information. I actually will reach out to them also and see if they're going to be doing that academy again, because it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, Dr. Jett, next month is the Color of Law, which might be a great one to have Britt join. I think that's a particular area of interest
You
of
gotta be doing
theirs.
some heavy reading.
Oh my gosh. But I will add just to that, just another component, which is the issue of power. So I think fundamentally some of the processes and bureaucracies are based off of communities not being in the driver's seat. Not to say those things are immutable or unchangeable, but I would say that it's based off of the ability of a group of people wanting to control and having certain interests in how things are run within both the political system and the bureaucracy. And the question is, again, how do you disrupt that, which I think Dr. Jett talked about, which is organizing as well as relationship building, and maybe even finding those folks who are open within those spaces, like Britt is a great example of that, to try to engage community in a more authentic way. But again, I think once you start to make an impact, there's going to be a blowback and there's going to be a fight if you start to mess with people's money, and then you have to be ready to bring the fight.
Yeah, I think of the Rethink 6570 coalition, and my cynical view is that never would have gotten the traction that it has if it hadn't been for the relatively affluent, I think primarily white neighborhoods on the near northeast side that got involved in it. And unfortunately, I don't think they got enough traction to help them in this round of rebuilding highways, but it does look like there's a little bit of hope left for the south side. So we have to take advantage of that and chip in, make our voice heard when they say they want it, even if they don't really.
So I do have a question for Dr. Jet and the group overall. How would you apply these lessons to Indianapolis, which doesn't really feel like a very big city or dense city in like the way that she describes the life of cities? If you had to say how it applies or doesn't, what would you say?
So to me, one of my favorite things about Indianapolis is sort of like these like little nodes that are kind of like scattered throughout the west, the north, and the east sides. And I think it's so neat that many of like the historic buildings that kind of like make up these nodes, still are there today, whether or not they're, occupied like in Meridian Kessler, or if they're, vacant like along like East New York Street or West Michigan Street. And I think that sort of like this like node preservation type of system that we have right now, with like some density sprinkled in, could be like a really interesting way to, one, provide housing in areas, and also make our neighborhoods more vibrant and allow for more, intimate commercial spaces. But yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I just want to again bring the outside perspective. Informal trade has no place in Indianapolis. Have you ever seen a market where people just downtown go and shop at informal trade? And I'm not talking your small coffee shop or people serving you a meal. I'm talking small trade as in, it's just the same thing you can buy inside the store is being sold at a a place where informal traders are allowed to do business. We have so many of our people that's hairdressers and fashion designers and whatever that cannot afford retail space downtown, and yet there is no place for them downtown to do their trade. And I think that will bring so much vibrancy to the city. It's also economic driver. 80% of all the African cities are taken over by informal traders, and cities won't let them go anywhere because they are the drivers of the economy. New York, you go downtown, you walk the street, you'll get a hot dog stand, but imagine you could buy anything that our people sell in an informal market. And not just thinking of a market as, oh, I'm going to go buy fruit and veg, or I'm going to buy a homemade piece of cake, but really all kinds of wares that you can buy inside a store. And that's the thing that I miss downtown.
That's a good point. I think that so I serve on the bond bank board, which issues public bonds for certain types of development, and one that received some funding was AMP Marketplace. I don't know if you all have been there, off of Indiana Avenue 16th, kind of near, not too far from, I guess, IUPUI area. It's hard for me to, Riverside, kind of in that area, and which Riverside is getting a lot of attention, interesting enough. And AMP is kind of similar to like the garage, where you have all of these like restaurants and smaller businesses that are supposed to be sharing the cost of this large facility, except for AMP was designed to be focused towards business of people of color and women. And so there's some additional public subsidy that's going into that place, but they also have what are those business incubator spaces that are part of AMP, also kind of tucked behind or to the side of the restaurants that are there. And I don't think it's caught on as well as it should, because I don't know if it's advertised or, you know, people really have the information about it. But that's kind of it's an interesting approach to, I think, what should be happening in some other places. But I also like to see things more small businesses connected to neighborhoods. I don't see so much of that here as we should. A little bit of it is happening along 10th Street, south. Wait, let me get east of downtown. Sorry, I get confused around here. You know, if you go like Woodruff Place and going up that 10th Street area, and then around there's some business development happening there. And it has an interesting sort of feel, but you know, I don't know how coordinated the efforts are across the community. And that's where I think Jane Jacobs would say there's some problems there. Like, what's the strategy? What's the full vision? And we don't know.
I was gonna say it might have been good, and maybe at another time, to invite someone from Edna Martin. So for me, I feel like that might have been like the kind of greatest example of where there was a community organization that functioned in the community and looked out and said, okay, we need housing, we need business, but we're not going to decide what it is. We're going to host these forums and have community come in and talk about what it should look like. But to me, the biggest challenge is, I won't say the biggest challenge because, you know, like relationships, but it's always about how to fund it. And I forget what's the big thing that they had to grant that they had to apply for, and they end up getting money, but it's not, it's very competitive. And usually like only one, I think one person, one organization in the city gets selected, and they got selected, maybe was it 2 or 3 years ago. And then we worked with them on their entrepreneurial aspect. But to me, I think that would be a great example of kind of like what she's talking about in the context. So you're looking at what does the community need in a more holistic manner, and also, you know, engaging them in what they want to see and what they want to have.
Yeah, that's a great example. Edna Martin. I've heard about their work. Yeah.
Awesome. So it is 6 o'clock. So I just want to take a second to thank Dr. Terry Jett for joining us. And we hope you can join the future ones. I'll send you some dates and book
We'll
titles
see.
if you're available.
I can keep up with you all.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you're way ahead of us. Don't worry. Light years ahead. And just as an announcement, next month is going to be The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Even if you don't have a chance to read the whole book, there's great NPR interview. I don't think it's like 10-15 minutes where he talks all about a lot of the concepts in his book. So even if you can't read the whole book, feel free to check that out and then join us next month.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. It's great,
All
great
right,
conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks,
Thank
Alan.
you.